Doctor Strange 2 has the worst magic I have ever seen in a movie. It's as if the creators had a list of all of the rules, all of the collective wisdom around how to write magic well, and then actively went against all of it. So I thought, let's scrap that video on magic systems I was planning, and instead use those notes to critique Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, a film that when it comes to magic, did everything wrong. So much so, in breaking it down, I'll have to cover all of the bases on what makes magic good or bad in a story. And by seeing how that lines up with the Multiverse of Madness, we can realise what happens when you break each individual rule. And of course, in the end, I'll be getting constructive and be suggesting a fix for how this movie, with just a few tweaks, could have been given a vastly superior magic system. Welcome to How to Fail at Magic, and let's begin it all with part 1. Explore before you expand. There is a universal piece of advice that applies to not just magic, but storytelling in general. Deeper is better than wider. Because what would you prefer in a story? To have over 1,000 alien species in your space opera, let's say, where 99% of the species shown are never explored in any detail, or to instead have only 5 species in your fantasy, let's say, but each one is greatly fleshed out, with their biology and culture and religions, and the way these species all interact with each other filled in with tremendous detail. Personally, I'd argue the latter is far more conducive towards a rich, compelling story world than the former. This really is one of those universal guidelines, and it applies everywhere in storytelling. If you're dealing with a character's flaw, expand upon that flaw's ramifications in the story and reasons for existing before you give them a second flaw. And if you're dealing with magic, it is better to have one spell that is considered with incredible depth than it is to have 30 spells, all of which are given only the most shallow of explorations. And I am sure you can tell where this one's going, because that latter approach is exactly what Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness falls for. So the author Brandon Sanderson has contributed a lot towards the general wisdom on making magic work well in writing. We'll be referencing back to him quite a few times in this video essay, but in one of his lectures, he says this.
Let's go to Sanderson's third law. Go deeper into a magic instead of wider. And this is one that Hollywood has a lot of trouble with. I find that a magic system that you have explored deeply in an interesting way is far superior to a large number of things. Considering the ramifications of what you already have is worth doing instead of creating something new.
In storytelling, the audience yearns to see an exploration of the ideas you've introduced far more than they yearn for wholly new concepts to be added in. And the more you explore a magic's applications and ramifications on the world, that is when good magic becomes great. To realise what happens when you fail at this, let's look at the now infamous Illuminati scene, and the entire thing revolves around what Wanda did to Black Bolt's mouth. For those of you who haven't seen the film, Wanda is massacring everyone she comes across, and to stop her, Mr. Fantastic warns Wanda that if she doesn't give it up, Black Bolt will speak at her with his power, and she'll die. And so then, without lifting a finger, purely using her mind, she transforms the flesh of Black Bolt's mouth to be sealed over. And from there, he suffers a rather grisly death. Now, what Wanda did here was, to be fair, quite cool. Admittedly, a great deal around it induced a lot of head scratching, such as Reed Richards, the smartest man alive, being stupid enough to not just waste a surprise advantage, but to then tell the baddie exactly who their strongest member is and how you can defeat them. But alright, the actual moment itself of Black Bolt dying, if you ignore all of the sloppy character work around it, the method of death itself is, to be fair, quite cool. I, for one, am partial to creative, gruesome death scenes. However, there is a terrible problem this death creates, because Wanda did this without waving her hands. Her eyes didn't even glow. She didn't make any gesture with her body whatsoever, giving these guys no chance to react. She merely thought it, and the flesh of his face was permanently warped by her thoughts alone, and the implications of this are incredible. I cannot stress how ridiculously overpowered this is, because this is a god tier level power. Thanos, what are you doing? Get out of here, move over, you are nothing compared to the Scarlet Witch. Because if you had just this ability alone, you could merely think it and warp the bones in someone's spine, permanently paralyzing them from the waist down. Or you could reach into their brain stem and instantly kill them with a thought. If you had just this power, you would be one of the most powerful supervillains ever depicted on screen, as all you have to do is merely look at Thor, merely look at the Hulk mid-rampage, merely look at Thanos, and you could insta-kill them with a thought. This brings to question why she never employed this terrifying power against Doctor Strange at any point in the movie, but that is something we'll cover in part 2 later on. But this is not to mention the thousands of really weird, interesting and freaky ways in which they're going to explore this power going on, I'm sure. Because maybe Wanda can... Oh, never mind. It seems the creators have forgotten they've given her this god-tier power entirely, and we're not only not seeing any exploration of it, we're also never going to see it used again. Yes, this moment is cool, very good, very shocking, very gruesome, me-likey, but from a magic point of view, in terms of weaving together a satisfying, cohesive story with a strong internal consistency, it's a travesty, because you just gave Wanda a god-tier level power, the ability to mold the bodies of other people with just a thought, meaning your enemies can do nothing to see your attacks coming, and it was never expanded upon. But sadly, violating this core tenet of good storytelling is a running theme throughout this movie. In every other scene, they give her a totally new, unforeshadowed power, a terrifying power which has terrible implications. Only then they make the far more terrible mistake of never exploring said power with any level of depth. What's this? Wanda is stuck behind a blast door? Quick, give her the ability to teleport using the shadows. What's this? Wanda is emerging from the mirror dimension? Quick, give her a healing factor that would make Wolverine envious as she heals back broken bones and gashes in her face. Who cares if this is completely unnecessary, completely over the top and not needed to be in the story? And also who cares that this very healing factor is forgotten about later in the movie when she gets hurt and doesn't heal from it. And I know there are a few people saying, well, it wasn't actually Wanda's body that got hurt, therefore it makes sense that it didn't heal. But like how come she has some of her powers when she's like possessing another person, but not all of her powers? Why is it she only gets some of her powers, but not all of them? Like, what even are the rules behind this magic? No one knows. Nobody knows. I don't think even the creators knew what the rules were behind this magic. Yes, her healing from coming out of that bloody gong makes for a cool moment, but the problem lies in how the creators seem to think that as this is cool, that's all that matters. They paid no thought into designing a rich, fun magic system where it all adds up and makes sense. The only thing they cared about was creating cool moments on a scene-by-scene basis, and the consequence is having magic not just as wide as an ocean and as deep as a puddle, but also magic that is abound with inconsistency. Yes, being cool matters, of course it does, to an extent, but when you give the rule of cool priority over everything else, you do not get quality. You instead get this. This isn't something the MCU was new to, however, introducing game-changing ideas but putting no effort into exploring them. For example, in the end of Black Panther, when they say, hey, we're going to share our culture and share our technology with the world, we're going to come out and let everyone see Wakanda for how it truly is. Yeah, They didn't explore that idea whatsoever, did they? There was absolutely no exploration of that idea in any of the movies, I'm just saying. Also, one other one, right? One massive pet peeve I've got, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only guy on Earth who was annoyed by this one, but it's still a massive pet peeve for me. Because in Infinity War, when this happens...
Where'd that come from?
It's nanotech, you like it?
It really got to me, because Bruce is an accomplished scientist, a very intelligent man. So he would have absolutely responded here saying, wait, you invented nanotechnology? Yeah? That's incredible! This does for technology what the discovery of penicillin did for medicine. This will revolutionize 3D printing. We can use this for delicate surgery. These nanomachines could even be a new way to fight cancer. Your invention of nanotechnology, this is going to change the course of human history. You've indirectly saved millions of lives, Tony. Wait, you have let everyone know about this, right? Well, that's a complicated question, Bruce. You just invented the single greatest leap in technology since the internet, and you use it for nothing more than to make another fucking suit? Well, kinda. You'll win the Nobel Prize for this 3 times over. This will revolutionize society in thousands of ways. You just invented a potential cure for cancer, and you didn't let anyone know? If we get killed today, no one will ever know you made this. This invention might be lost forever. Well, when you put it like that, sure, it sounds bad, but I can't believe you've done this, Tony. I knew you had an ego, and the Iron Man suit's one thing, but this? Hugging the scientific discovery of the century just for yourself. This is pure evil. I can't believe you've done this, Tony. Look, try not to think too hard about this one, Bruce. It's not like the writers did. I would like to end that skit with a profound apology to all of my American viewers for appropriating their accent so terribly. But while I have been stressing that you should explore before you expand, this does not mean you must have a small world, because you can totally create a sprawling universe filled with all sorts of magic and cultures and fantastical creatures. It's just if you go down that path, you've really got to work your socks off to make a world like Middle-earth work. But if you pull that off, you have a story that is captivatingly rich in ways that a small-scale world could never be. The Lord of the Rings really is a masterpiece in more ways than one here, and if you want to check it out so you can indulge in Middle-earth and learn how to world build like Tolkien while you're at it, you can listen to the Fellowship of the Ring on the house today through Audible, the sponsor of today's video. The Fellowship of the Ring is a brilliant audiobook, and I think Rob Inglis's narration just enriches the whole story. It's very well read. And if you've never checked out the Fellowship of the Ring novel before, now is a fantastic chance to, as to celebrate the Rings of Power's release. You can click my link in the description, or text LOTR to 500 and you'll get a credit you can use to grab the Fellowship of the Ring, and once you do, it's yours to keep forever. Plus, you'll also get a 30-day membership, which has literally hundreds of free audiobooks you can listen to once you're done with the Fellowship. Audible is the main sponsor of my channel because I use them daily. I'll listen while walking the dogs, using the gym, or generally just playing games. I find it a brilliant way to read more and make no sacrifices in terms of how I spend my time. And you'll realize that for yourself if you click my link in the description or text LOTR to 500. Use that credit and grab the Fellowship of the Ring for free on Audible today. But cutting back to it, that Illuminati scene, from a magic point of view, it does not work well. So let's compare it to another scene in fiction where magic was used in all the right ways. Let's look at Magneto's prison escape in X-Men 2. So, Magneto is being kept in a purely plastic prison cell. All guards need to go through a metal detector in order to get in. They use plastic truncheons, and this means he's totally powerless. But in this scene, due to a little injection a guard received the night before from Mystique, Magneto manages to lift the guard in the air before saying,
"Too much iron in your blood.
And then he rips out the meager amount of metal in his body and massacres everyone on his way out. Like, this is a great scene. It's a wonderful scene. Not just because it's very badass, but also because it's playing into all of the things that makes great magic great. He had a major limitation to his power, which his captors exploited to its fullest. Limitations, by the way, we'll be discussing later in the video. But yet, here's the creative solution, because the human body has trace amounts of metal in it anyway. So you could, using comic book logic at least, inject a bunch of it into someone and it wouldn't instantly kill them, and you could then use them as a mule for sneaking it past a metal detector as a means of bringing that metal to Magneto. It's a very creative way to play around with the villain's powers, making for a wonderful scene. And also, what's very relevant here, instead of the Wanda approach of having 30 different powers, Magneto has just the one. As a consequence of this, when Magneto lifts the guard in the air, it's such a cathartic moment. It's so satisfying, because we're seeing his powers used in unexpected ways, yet ways that also make total sense to us. It's a very intuitive exploration of what's been set up. Meanwhile, with Wanda, when she seals Black Bolt's mouth, because she's using a power we have never seen her use before, it doesn't land anywhere near as well from a magic point of view. When Christine tries to let America out of her cell, but she can't because Wanda has suddenly developed electromagnetic fields that interfere with computers, it is the opposite of satisfying. In fact, it feels a hell of a lot like the writers were in a corner, didn't know how to justify America not being able to escape, so gave Wanda a totally new power just to solve that problem in that specific scene. And this is something that the writers did far more than once in this movie. The same can be said for when Doctor Strange tries to cast a portal in Kamar-Taj, and Wanda atomizes his sling ring, despite her not only not being in the same room, but not even being in the same dimension to him. But this is all, sadly, a running theme in the MCU. Doctor Strange 2 is not the only film falling for this problem. They keep giving characters all kinds of powers, but very rarely apply those powers in the creative ways they really should be. I mean, for one, when Thanos has the Infinity Gauntlet, there were so many insanely creative ways you could have applied that power. What if, in the middle of the endgame fight, Thanos has got hold of some of the stones, and Thor drops his hammer onto Thanos' chest, in the same way he did for Loki in Thor 1, and Thanos uses the Power Stone to make him the strongest being in all creation. But even then, he cannot lift the hammer. But then, just when Thor looks all smug, Thanos switches to using the Reality Stone, and he turns off gravity, causing everything to float. It's a basic principle. The hammer has an infinite mass. You can't lift it no matter how strong you are. However, weight is determined by mass times gravity. So if you turned off the gravity, it no longer has any weight. Without gravity, anyone can lift Thor's hammer, and then he uses it to clobber Thor in the face. Now, those are the kinds of moments in storytelling when magic is at its best, when established rules are applied and exploited in highly creative ways. Now, we could have had Thanos do exactly that in Endgame, and the fans would have gone nuts for it. The reaction from everyone would have been crazy. Or he could have used the stones in a myriad of other insanely cool, creative ways as they interact with the other magic systems, those being the other superheroes' powers. Instead, all he does is punch people and blast them with beams of energy. You just gave Thanos an infinity of possibility, the ability to slow down time, the ability to rewind time entirely, the ability to turn off gravity by altering reality, and you picked the most boring, uncreative option possible by having him just punch them extra hard and making a laser beam. It's such a waste of such a chance to do something so cool with your magic. But alright, I'm going to do this right now for Marvel. I'm going to take a piece of magic in Doctor Strange 2 and thoroughly explore its potential ramifications and applications in the way any writer should if they're writing magic. Let's look at the sling ring. rings. The thing is, if you properly think through this tool, you'll quickly realize how if you had just a sling ring, and that by itself, that is not just useful magic. That power alone would turn someone into a terrifying opponent. It's more than just the ability to teleport. It gives you so many powers and tactical options, it's not even funny. Firstly, you are now immune from all full damage, as you can just cast it below yourself. And Wong, what are you thinking? Don't cast it like that. You're a veteran sorcerer. You should know better. Instead, cast it so the exit portal is sending you up towards the sky. And from there, when you go up, just as you're at the apogee of your arc, cast a portal directly beneath your feet, so you can then land on the road in a nice clean stop. You would think that if someone were the Sorcerer Supreme, the most knowledgeable and experienced sorcerer on Earth, someone who's been at this for longer than Doctor Strange, they would at least know how to use a sorcerer's staple tool properly. Or screw all that, cast the portal so you're yeeting yourself over the big demon you're fighting, and if you time things well enough and you're fast enough with your fingers, you can stay in the air, arcing from portal to portal forever, theoretically, giving you the incredible advantage of being able to hit your enemy from high up with other kinds of blasts, and because you're so high up in the air, there is nothing they can do to hurt you while you rain down hell upon them. A sling ring is extra portable. You can smuggle one in your pocket very easily, so why not have 3 of them for backup, Doctor Strange? They're so useful, small, and evidently kind of fragile, you'd be a fool to not carry at least one as a spare. Forget vibranium! A sling ring is to Captain America's shield what a modern-day artillery truck is to a cannon from 1257 AD. It is not just unbreakable as a shield, it simultaneously reflects all attacks back at the one attacking you. Do that to Wanda and her exploding blasts in the Temple Siege, dead. You'd think that if there were 300 sorcerers, all of whom have sling rings, just one of them would have had the thought to maybe reflect Wanda's exploding blasts back at her in the Temple Siege. If they had done that, she'd be dead. You can cast one portal ahead of you on a wall, the other high in the sky looking down, and doing that in a kind of mind-bendy way, you can get a bird's eye view over anywhere, this being a wonderful way to gather intelligence, #Wheel of Time. You can of course cast it above enemies and allow your allies to instantly close the distance, leaping onto them for a sneaky stab in the back. Do that when Wanda is hovering around the temple, suddenly someone stabbed their spear through her heart, dead. You can instead just create a portal next to Wanda where the other end goes into space, and because there's a vacuum, she'll get sucked right up like dust into a hoover, whereupon she will instantly suffocate and die. Dead. A sling ring is not just a direct upgrade from Captain America's shield, it is also a direct upgrade from a lightsaber, because with a lightsaber, it's a close-range weapon, unless you're very skilled with the Force, in which case you can throw it. But with a sling ring, if they're 20 meters away, all you have to do is cast a sweeping portal, as Thor Ragnarok demonstrated is possible, then just close it off at the right moment, and suddenly you've chopped off the Scarlet Witch's legs by the thighs, and she's now screaming at the top of her lungs, dying from blood loss. Dead. A sling ring alone is such a formidable weapon. If you took just one person very well versed in its use and put them up against Thanos at full strength, they could decapitate him with just a wave of their fingers. Like, why have weapons like Mjolnir? Why have Iron Man suits and Captain America shields and all of those fancy abilities when one overweight factory worker suffering from asthma, called Dave, but has a sling ring, could in theory twiddle his fingers and cut the almighty Scarlet Witch in twain in 1 second flat? I appreciate that I am absolutely shitting over the way magic has been handled in the MCU, and that is precisely the point, because this is what it looks like when you stop and actually think through how magic works in your world. Like, seriously, this is a very obvious, intuitive expansion upon the magic system. You can cast sling rings from all all corners of the world over? What if you simply cast one end by your enemy and the other into the vacuum of space, whereupon they'll get instantly sucked in and then you can just close the portal behind them? That's a hell of an easy way to win any and all fights, and there is absolutely nothing proposed in the movies that say this couldn't be done. Quite simply, sling rings really are too OP. They should have never been allowed to be as terrifying a threat as they currently are. The answer to all of this is really quite simple. They should have thought things through long before ever introducing this power to ensure that while it is very cool, there are also many things portals can't do. Perhaps in Doctor Strange 1, have a throwaway line saying that sling rings can only be cast close to the ground. So there is no casting them 10 miles up or in the depths of space. Now that problem has been entirely solved by just throwing in one line of dialogue. You can have it so in Infinity War, Wong never slices off that goon's hand. Doing that was a big mistake because it introduced a rather terrifying power sling rings have the ability to do. So why not have it so Wong tries to close the portal on him, but we see that portals are incapable of closing so long as there's an object obstructing the hole, and then the big guy grabs the edges of the portal and is forcing it back open with both his hands as he's coming back through. Now Spider-Man or someone else has to punch the guy back to the other side, and it introduces a cool limitation to the magic. Now sling rings can't actually damage anything. Not directly, they can only be used strictly for teleportation. Now, with these changes, I'd argue sling rings are much more balanced in a fight, but even then, are still absurdly useful if the user is creative enough. But in terms of how the magic stands, there are so many moments where people make the entirely wrong choices. But that leads us quite snugly into another ramification of poorly thinking through how magic works in your story. And on this front, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is the ultimate cautionary tale. Let's cover it in part 2. Why don't they just? A terrible consequence of giving a character such as Wanda a huge arsenal of spells, the ability to seal people's mouths, the ability to teleport, and so on, is that the more you do this, you'll find the risk of an inconsistency or an outright plot hole happening goes up exponentially. I love the Lord of the Rings films. They're the best fantasy movies ever made. And when Gandalf heats up Aragorn's sword in film 2 so he drops it, it's a fun scene. 10 out of 10. But the problem this scene has is you've just introduced the fact that Gandalf can heat up the weapons people are holding, forcing them to drop them. A very useful spell. So why does he never use it again at any point in the trilogy? I mean, when they're fighting those orcs in Minas Tirith and they nearly kill him, it would have come in really quite handy then, wouldn't it? And the answer you may give to that nitpick is, well, if you see a story which has one tiny lapse in verisimilitude, and you use that lone nitpick as an excuse to hate on that story, the problem does not lie in the story, the problem lies in you for being so petty, for getting so upset about such a tiny thing. And fair enough, frankly. But this critique does still stand. It still holds water. For this is one of those universal laws around magic. For those of you who don't know, in order to understand this next bit, a soft magic system as decreed by our Lord and Saviour Brando Sando, praise be, is when the way in which a magic works are not firmly defined, that the rules are ambiguous / non-existent, basically. But meanwhile, a hard magic system is where its mechanics and rules are very well defined. Both systems have their time to shine in storytelling, neither is inherently objectively better than the others. However, it is irrelevant if you're writing a hard or soft system in this case, because if a character uses an ability once, the audience will be endlessly thinking, man, that was a really useful spell. So why did they not use it again here? Regardless of whether it's a soft or hard system, the audience will ask that dreaded question, why don't they just? And if you as a writer want to avoid the audience asking that question, and in doing so, ensure they remain nice and immersed, you can do two things. Either come up with a good justification as to why they can't use that specific spell at this point, point, or simply never give them that ability in the first place. When you do neither of these things, some of your audience will be asking, why didn't Gandalf heat up the orc swords in that final battle? Why didn't Doctor Strange use that incredibly useful multiplication spell he used on Thanos on Wanda? But at the end of the day, those two examples really are nitpicks. They really are. I don't think there's a single person alive who was watching Return of the King and was loving it to bits, but then realised Gandalf wasn't using that one spell he used in film 2, so then they started vibrating with rage before leaving a 1-star review. However, when you tell a story where you dedicate no thought into the magic, such as the multiverse of madness, all of a sudden, every scene is crammed full of these kinds of plot holes. Every scene is overshadowed and downright ruined for a good chunk of your audience because they are endlessly asking that dreaded question, wait, why don't they just? And they're doing it at a rate of once per minute, and the consequence is that large swathes of your audience are incapable of being immersed, and they will see your story for the poorly considered, verisimilitudeless construct that it is, which is most definitely not a good thing. The thing is, I'm about to do that right now. I'm about to interrogate and poke and prod at this film's logic, asking, why doesn't he just? Why doesn't she just? And you will quickly realise this film has such a poorly considered magic system, it's downright fascinating. Wanda has the ability to psychically overpower Charles Xavier of all people, and that is impressive stuff, very impressive stuff, but for some reason she never tries, not once, to penetrate Doctor Strange's mind. You'd think if she can dominate Professor X of all people at his own game, she must therefore be one of the most powerful psychic beings in the multiverse. At the very least, she is a more powerful psychic than Professor X. So why does she never use this incredible psychic power on the three main characters as they run away? Because if she did, the movie would be over. If she can teleport using reflections or the shadows, both of which she's been established to do, why doesn't she teleport in front of them, cutting off their escape when they're running in that tunnel? There's a good reason why. Because if she did that, the movie would be over. Another one, Wanda can disintegrate people. That's a pretty scary power, very scary indeed. She can literally tear you to ribbons with a wave of her hand, and that is very powerful. Hats off, very, very powerful power you've got there. And when Wong has outlived his usefulness, she decides to not disintegrate him, but rather to toss him off a cliff when she wants him dead. The problem is, why use such a risky way of dispatching enemies? Because people in real life have been known to survive falls down mountains, and let's not forget he made a portal to get here. I know he said there was a radius where magic couldn't be used, which is very interesting, seeing as how he uses magic a good dozen times within that radius anyway, but it is conceivable that the base of the cliff is far away enough for him to cast a portal and survive the fall. So why not just incinerate him, or blow his brain up like you did for Reed? There is only one reason why she didn't do that very sensible thing, because Wong had to be alive for the climax. Despite being given every reason to melt his brain, she does not, solely because the script says she is barred from acting with common sense. Let's also not forget that she confronts Doctor Strange head-on in Kamar-Taj, and again in the tunnel, and again in that pocket dimension. She could shred him to bits like she did for Reed in any of those situations, but she does not, solely because the script says no. That's the core of it. If you give someone too many magical powers, you effectively make them a god. And the problem with that is if you don't handle such an all-powerful character very carefully, they will stop feeling like a real person to your audience and will more so feel like a puppet with your hand up their bum, because they are so powerful, can use their dozens of terrifying abilities in so many grisly ways, but they never do, because if they did, if they displayed the intelligence of just an average person, they would win instantly, and so the villain needs to act in nonsensical ways, otherwise there would be no story. But here are some productive suggestions with the Wong problem. There's 3 I can think of that solve this issue in the movie. Choice A, you simply have Wanda look at the Darkhold distracted by its majesty, and while her mind is elsewhere, Wong uses the chance to escape, and then she sends one of the Golem goons after him. And then we have a 30-second scene later where he dispatches the Golem on the top of one of the mountains. There you go, that's a classic move, that could have worked fine. Choice B, you give Wanda some kind of limitation to her magic. You make it so she can disintegrate matter, but it costs her a huge amount of energy to do. It completely tires her out, or uses some finite resource on her person. So she chooses to throw Wong off the edge instead, killing him in a way that uses far less energy. That could have worked, but option C, and what is by far my favourite option, just take away her ability to disintegrate people. Strip it away, because it adds nothing to the story, and she is powerful enough as is already. I appreciate some people maybe getting a tad confrontational in the comments here. Some people saying, just turn your brain off, it's a movie, it doesn't need to make sense. And my response is, no. Because what I like to think is a fairly reasonable request is I prefer characters to act like humans. I prefer to have each character act as a real person would in any given situation, because when you pull that off, it bolsters immersion like nothing else, and it allows me to get invested into their characters because they actually feel like real people instead of cardboard cutouts who are strictly banned from employing common sense at every conceivable turn in the story. I just want my characters to feel like real people, to have everything they do make sense. Is that really too much to ask? The thing is, I hate nitpicking on the closer look. I really hate it. Okay, I don't hate it, it's more so a sort of guilty pleasure I try not to indulge in too much, but I prefer to critique general things, general rules being broken which we can all learn lessons from, and frankly, I'd argue that obsessing over all of the little nitpicks cinema sin style is an unhealthy way to break down stories. But when it's at a point where in every scene, every time your character is on screen, there is always a new plot hole created, something has gone horribly wrong with your story, and in this case, it's because they put far too little thought into having verisimilitude in their universe. They did not think the magic through, and it came back to bite them hundreds of times over. But there is a whole other aspect of good magic that this movie, again, fails to include, and let's cover that in part 3. Limitations trump strengths. If I had to pin it down, I'd say creativity at the end of the day is really problem solving. It's when you're presented with a difficult challenge, that's when you come up with your most creative ideas. And generally, the more difficult the challenge, the more constraints you have, the more that forces you to stretch your imagination to think up solutions. If your character has 50 different powers like Wanda, well, you can just apply whichever one is needed in the situation, like teleporting, or popping people's heads like balloons, or what have you. Failing that, just invent a wholly new one on the fly. God knows that's what the writers did. No real creativity is needed here. However, if your character has only one power, and it's a power poorly suited for the task at hand, that now means the writer, and from the audience's perspective, the character, has to really stretch themselves, thinking up wacky, unforeseen applications of their magic to solve this very challenging problem. Focusing on limitations over strengths in your magic system bolsters creativity, and also these new limitations naturally lend themselves to a character struggling all the harder, providing trickier obstacles for them, and naturally, the more a character struggles, the more compelling their journey. Let's look at telekinesis. In the grand scheme of magic, the ability to grab anything and toss it around, it's not very compelling. Partly because we've seen this power used hundreds of times in the exact same way, but mainly because it's going against the real Bransandy's second law of magic. As he says himself,
flaws are more interesting than the powers themselves. This is, again, a kind of core storytelling concept. Your story is generally going to revolve around what your characters have trouble doing, around what the magic can't do, rather than what it can. The same goes for characters. The story is about what they can't do, or what is hard for them to do, rather than about what they can do. I suggest that you kind of keep this in the forefront of your mind, that flaws and limitations of magic are more interesting.
If you have bog standard telekinesis, there are no limitations there. You can grab any object you like, toss it in any direction you like, and it never fatigues you or has any kind of cost. You could lob things around all day long if you liked. And dare I say it, such a power is a relatively boring one. Let's apply this rule of flaws being more interesting than strengths and see how we can make a more compelling magic system. How about we change it so a character has telekinesis, but can only control metal? It is suddenly leaps and bounds more interesting than just generic telekinesis, because now it has limitations. Now there are ways for people to abuse and exploit their weaknesses, such as using plastic weapons, or prison cells with no metal in sight. You can imprison Magneto, because the man has a critical weakness, but you could never imprison Wanda. She is just too powerful. She can teleport, and body hop, and rip doors down with a thought, and also fly while she's at it. She is impossible to contain, and impossible to fight too, because she has no limitations for you to exploit. But with Magneto, now you've effectively nerfed his magic, the character has more opportunities to be creative with said magic, because everything is harder for him. And after all, constraints breed creativity, such as him throwing a knife before yanking it back, or lifting a man in the air using the metal in his blood, or controlling where a man's hand goes by using his watch, or ripping out a man's fillings as a torture technique. This is good. Magneto has a solid power set that lends itself well to telling a great story, but we can take this further. If you took this power of telekinesis and stripped it down even more, where perhaps you can only affect metal, and can only push it away from you, and it costs a finite resource on your person, one where if you run out of said resource, you can no longer use the magic. It does depend on the kind of story you want to tell, but I would argue such a limited magic system is way more conducive to a great story, as it now has tremendous limitations, meaning the challenge for your characters is all the greater, also meaning it's more conducive towards thinking up these cathartic moments where magic is used in unforeseen ways that get around and exploit quirks in the system. You could use this power to blast coins out before you like you're a human shotgun. You can use it to stop bullets. You can push against metal beneath you, and that would allow you to do some very powerful jumps. Jumps where if you're not careful, you might fall and splat into the ground. Maybe you could try pushing metal structures over, but be careful, because maybe you'll be the one who moves, and while the structure doesn't budge, you'll go splatting into a wall. This is a magic system that our Lord and Saviour Sir Wright-Salott Sanderson used himself in his Mistborn trilogy, and it was a very limited system that was given a great deal of creative exploration. And if you want to check out Mistborn and see what a story looks like when it has great magic, you can always click my link in the description and grab the audiobook for free on Audible. But when you look at Doctor Strange 2, there is no weakness Wanda has that they can exploit. There is no terrible cost America pays every time she hops to another universe. Her only limitation is that she hasn't mastered control over when she can create the portals, which doesn't feel like it's enough if you ask me. And Doctor Strange himself, to a weaker extent, falls into the same ballpark as Wanda because he has a huge number of spells, an exhaustive number of spells, and not only does he very rarely apply them creatively, said spells, their applications, their costs, their negative ramifications are hardly ever explored. But ramble over, let's get constructive. How could this movie have been improved? Let's cover that in part 4. A better magic system. So, what can we do to improve the magic in this story? Well, first off, what we got to do before anything else is strip it down. Wanda can teleport, and has telekinesis, and has mind control, and 20 other abilities, and it's all too much. Here's what we do. Keep the powers Wanda's shown in other stories, fair enough, you can't really change them seeing as we've already seen them. But what we do is say the Darkhold grants a very specific, extra kind of power. There is one thing the Darkhold does, and this one power she uses to devastating effect throughout the whole story. Now, I'm not rewriting the whole movie today, only the magic system, because that is the focus of this video. But what I feel could work really well is if that first bit of the movie, things are all pretty much the same. They fight the big old squid, Wong and Strange sit the girl down, and while Wong takes her to the temple, Doctor Strange goes to Wanda and they can have a nice chat where he recruits her, then brings her back to Kamar-Taj too. There is no contrived slip of the tongue before this point revealing her villainy. However, he does get a glimpse of her fingers, and he sees they're all black, and it baffles him. So they're at the temple, and suddenly a big monster just like the one from the prologue attacks. And while all the sorcerers are holding up a shield to keep the monster out, Wanda is seeking out America, and Doctor Strange is with Wong. Strange brings up Wanda's fingers being black to Wong, and he tells Strange that it's the telltale giveaway that someone's been using the Darkhold. To use it rots the body. And we learn from Wong here in voiceover that the Darkhold perverts all living things. Using it, one can manipulate living matter, and that manifests itself in many ways. They can grab someone by the head, and in doing so, seize control over their limbic system, turning them into a mindless thrall under her command who does everything she says. And as Wong says this, we see Wanda doing this to the sorcerers within the temple, working her way towards America, visibly displaying her powers while Wong explains them in voiceover, recruiting more and more to her army. And Wong also says it's been known to create terrifying monsters. They can take organic matter and congeal it and warp it into these horrifying abominations of life. And Strange says, just like that thing outside right now. And together they realise how Wanda deceived them and run to fight her. Wanda can't create stuff out of thin air, but she can manipulate existing organic tissue. A good writer, and let's be honest, a fairly morbid writer, could take just that power alone and apply it in hundreds of wonderfully depraved ways. How about she can't touch metal and plastic, but if she hits a living thing with her energy blasts, she can atomize them. Now that's great, because that's a limitation. Doctor Strange can use his cloak as a shield now, as it stops her blast from doing any damage. But if the blast so much as touch your skin, she'll turn you to ash. Maybe when they hop around universes, someone has a suit of Iron Man armor, and it actually renders them immune to Wanda's attacks, because there is no exposed skin. There is nothing for her to latch on to. And this person gives Wanda a serious run for her money, because they're directly exploiting a limitation of her magic. And also now we've narrowed our sights, establishing that the thing the Darkhold allows mastery over is living matter. Now when she uses that very power to seal Black Bolt's mouth, it lands with way more of a punch, and as a story beat, it's a direct upgrade. Because instead of it being the 10th bit of magic they've made up on the spot, it's now a creative application of a power that's already been established. So how about in that Illuminati fight, she doesn't just seal Black Bolt's mouth, she also turns off his vocal cords, meaning he's totally useless. So she fights all of the superheroes and has a very hard time of it. But then, now Black Bolt is declawed, she grabs him by the head, turning him into her loyal goon, and then she reactivates his voice, and he fights for her. This being the turning point of the fight, where before here, they were kicking her ass, and now she starts killing them all one by one with Black Bolt's help. Also, what will be very cool is the more you use the Darkhold, the more it corrupts you and converts you into undead. So we see it start with her hands, then progress to her face, as Wanda is gradually looking more and more like a zombie as the film goes on, getting corrupted by this evil power. That's a fun cost we can throw in too. It also feels like it would fit in quite snugly with Sam Raimi's style too. But Wanda being able to possess alternate versions of herself in other universes really is essential in order to have the plot we want to have, so we got to keep that in. But what we do is say the Darkhold grants these two separate powers, and they are two separate powers. And the thing is, throughout the whole movie, Wanda's been menacing Strange, and he's been purely on the defensive, because with her new powers, she's just too much for him to handle. And so now, when Doctor Strange possesses the Stranger's corpse in the climax, and she blasts him with her powers, the audience gets all terrified, thinking she's killed him and she's won the movie. But nothing happens. Her blast has absolutely no effect, because he's dead, not living, and he is therefore immune to her spells in the climax. Before this point in the story, she's been owning him the whole time and he's been purely on the defensive, but in the climax, he uses the established powers in a creative way to exploit her weaknesses and level the playing field by possessing a corpse, something her magic has no power over. If you gave that moment the proper execution, it would be so powerful and cathartic, as it exploits the limitations of her power in such a creative way. Notice how by greatly simplifying things, by giving her only one kind of power instead of 20, her magic is now more compelling. It's now being used in more interesting ways. Also, she's now struggling more in her fights due to being weaker, which again, I'd argue, makes for better fight scenes and a better overall story. Routinely, great magic systems are about simplicity. For all you writers out there, try to identify a simple, easy to grasp core concept around how the magic works and thoroughly explore its ramifications, and just as importantly, its limitations. Only once you've done that should you start to think what other bits of magic you want to add in as well. But if you want to carry on the conversation, don't bother with making a comment, because I've got a Discord server geared for writers, and we talk about, our characters, and we workshop ideas, and as well as all the movies we like anyway. I'm on this server every day, so if you want to talk about this video, ask me questions, and frankly just discuss any writing related issue you're dealing with, me and my growing community of writers would love to have you on our server, and there is a link down below in the description. Also, if you haven't checked out Audible already, I really do recommend you give their site a go. I genuinely use Audible daily because it's just so useful to me, and you can find a link for that in the description too. But anyway, thanks for watching, keep writing, and I'll see you guys next time on The Closer Look.